The gunshot that tore through Nathaniel Crowley's shoulder on a blistering July afternoon in 1883 probably saved her life, though she wouldn't understand that until much later. She had been running for 3 days straight, her horse finally giving out just 5 miles south of Cody, Wyoming, and the men tracking her were closing in fast. The bullet came from a different direction entirely, dropping one of her pursuers from his saddle before the others scattered into the rocks. Nathaniel pressed herself against a boulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps, blood soaking through her torn sleeve as she searched for whoever had just changed the course of her immediate future. Harrison Vance lowered his rifle and watched the remaining riders disappear into the distance before turning his attention to the woman who had collapsed behind the red sandstone formation. He had been tracking a mountain lion that had taken 2 of his calves when he heard the thunder of hooves and spotted the chase. Growing up in these territories had taught him to recognize desperation when he saw it, and the way those men had been riding suggested they wanted the woman for reasons that had nothing to do with justice. He approached slowly, hands visible, his worn leather boots crunching on the dry earth. "Easy now," he called out, his voice carrying the low, steady tone he used with spooked horses. "I'm not with them. Name's Harrison Vance. Looks like you could use some help." Nathaniel's vision swam as she tried to focus on the figure approaching. He was tall, maybe 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of weathered bronze. Dark hair curled slightly at the edges of his hat, and his clothes carried the dust of someone who spent more time with cattle than people. Her hand trembled as she pressed it harder against her wounded shoulder, knowing she had no choice but to trust this stranger or die out here in the July heat. "They'll come back," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from days without proper water. "You shouldn't have gotten involved." Harrison reached her side and crouched down, his eyes assessing the wound with practiced efficiency. "Well, I did get involved, so we'd best deal with what comes next. That shoulder needs tending before infection sets in. My ranch is about 2 miles north. Can you ride?" "My horse is dead," Nathaniel said, the words bitter on her tongue. That mare had carried her all the way from Kansas, and she had loved that animal more than she had loved most people in her life. "Mine's got enough strength for 2, Harrison replied. He stripped off his vest and pressed it against her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands that looked like they could break stone. "This is going to hurt, but we need to slow the bleeding. What's your name?" "Nathaniel Crowley," she gasped as pressure sent white-hot pain through her arm. "And before you ask, I didn't do whatever they claimed I did." "Wasn't planning to ask," Harrison said. He studied her face for a moment, taking in the sharp intelligence in her green eyes, the determined set of her jaw beneath the grime and exhaustion. She was younger than him, probably 24 or 25, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its braid and cheekbones that spoke of missed meals. "We'll get you patched up first. Everything else can wait." He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they made their way to where his bay gelding waited patiently. Getting her into the saddle took effort from both of them, but Harrison managed to swing up behind her, keeping one arm wrapped around her waist to hold her steady. Nathaniel's head swam with pain and exhaustion, and she found herself leaning back against the solid warmth of his chest as consciousness threatened to slip away. The ride to Harrison's ranch passed in a blur of heat and agony. Nathaniel drifted in and out of awareness, catching glimpses of rolling grassland, the distant peaks of the Absaroka Range, and finally, a modest ranch house built of weathered timber with a barn, and several outbuildings scattered across a valley that followed a clear running creek. The property wasn't large by cattle-barren standards, but it had the feel of a place built by someone who understood the land and respected it. Harrison carried her inside, calling out for his housekeeper as he shouldered through the front door. "Mrs. Patterson, need hot water and clean bandages." An older woman with silver-streaked hair appeared from the kitchen, her eyes widening at the sight of the bleeding woman in Harrison's arms. "Good Lord, what happened?" "Gunshot wound," Harrison said, carrying Nathaniel to the large table and laying her down as gently as he could. "Found her being chased by 4 riders about 5 miles south. Send Thomas to town for Doc Henley, but we need to clean this now." Mrs. Patterson had worked for the Vance family since Harrison was a boy, and she didn't waste time with questions. She hurried to gather supplies while Harrison carefully peeled away the blood-soaked fabric of Nathaniel's shirt. The wound was a clean through and through, which was both good and bad. Good because the bullet hadn't lodged in bone or tissue. Bad because it meant 2 wounds to treat instead of 1. Nathaniel came fully alert when Harrison began cleaning the injury, biting down hard on the leather strap he offered to keep from screaming. The pain was extraordinary, but she had survived worse. She had survived things that made a bullet wound seem almost mundane, though the scars from those experiences weren't visible on her skin. "You're doing fine," Harrison murmured, his hands steady as he worked. "Almost through the worst of it. Mrs. Patterson, bring that whiskey from the cabinet." The older woman brought a bottle and watched as Harrison poured some directly into the wound. Nathaniel's back arched off the table, and the leather strap muffled her cry. Tears streamed down her temples, but she didn't look away from Harrison's face. His expression was tight with concentration and something else. Sympathy, maybe, or understanding that went deeper than the moment. "Why are you helping me?" Nathaniel asked when she could speak again, her voice barely above a whisper. Harrison met her eyes as he began wrapping clean bandages around her shoulder. "Same reason anyone should help another person in trouble. It's the right thing to do. Most people don't see it that way." "Then most people are fools," Harrison said simply. He finished securing the bandage and straightened up, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension. "Mrs. Patterson will get you cleaned up and into some proper clothes. Doc Henley should be here within the hour. You'll stay here until you're healed enough to travel." "Those men who were chasing me," Nathaniel said, struggling to sit up. "They work for my husband. He'll send more when these ones don't come back." The silence that followed was heavy. Harrison exchanged a glance with Mrs. Patterson, and something passed between them that Nathaniel couldn't quite read. Finally, Harrison pulled up a chair and sat down, his forearms resting on his knees as he studied her. "Your husband hired men to hunt you down and shoot you." "The shooting was probably an accident," Nathaniel said, and the laugh that escaped her was hollow. "He wants me brought back alive. There are things worse than dying, Mr. Vance. I learned that over the past 2 years. Harrison's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Nobody's going to take you anywhere you don't want to go, not from my land. But I need to know what we're dealing with. Who is your husband, Marcus Crowley?" "He owns half of Dodge City, Kansas. Saloons, gambling houses, a freight company. He's got enough money to buy the law and enough men willing to do his dirty work that the law doesn't matter anyway." Nathaniel's hands twisted in her lap, and she forced them still. "I was 17 when I married him. Thought I was getting security, a future. Turned out I was just getting a prison with fancy wallpaper." Mrs. Patterson made a soft sound of sympathy and placed a gentle hand on Nathaniel's uninjured shoulder. "Poor child. You rest now. We'll figure everything out once the doctor's seen to you." Doc Henley arrived an hour later, a gruff man in his 50s with hands that smelled of carbolic acid and eyes that had seen every sort of injury the frontier could produce. He examined Nathaniel's shoulder, prodded at the stitches Harrison had already put in, and grunted his approval. "You did good work, Harrison," the doctor said, repacking his bag. "Keep the wound clean, change the bandages twice daily, and watch for fever. She's young and strong. Should heal up fine if infection doesn't set in." He turned to Nathaniel. "You'll need to keep that arm still for at least 2 weeks. Any strenuous activity could tear those stitches, and you'll be right back where you started." "Thank you, Doctor," Nathaniel said quietly, after Doc Henley left Mrs. Patterson helped Nathaniel upstairs to a small bedroom with whitewashed walls and a window that looked out over the valley. The bed was soft, the linens clean, and Nathaniel couldn't remember the last time she had been in a room that felt this safe. She slept for nearly 14 hours, waking only when the morning sun streamed through the window and the smell of coffee drifted up from the kitchen. Her shoulder throbbed, but it was a manageable pain. Someone had left clean clothes on the chair by the bed, simple, practical garments that belonged to a working ranch. Nathaniel dressed carefully, moving slowly to avoid straining her injury, and made her way downstairs. Harrison was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing account books with the concentration of a man who had taught himself numbers long after most people learned them. He looked up when she appeared, and something in his expression softened. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot," Nathaniel said, but there was the faintest hint of humor in her voice. "But alive, which is better than the alternative. Sit down. I'll get you some breakfast." Harrison stood and moved to the stove, where Mrs. Patterson had left a pot of porridge and fresh biscuits. He served Nathaniel a generous portion and poured her coffee, then sat back down across from her. "We need to talk about what happens next." Nathaniel wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, drawing warmth from the ceramic. "I know. You've done more than enough already, Mr. Vance. Once I'm strong enough to travel, I'll move on. Head further west, maybe up to Montana, somewhere Marcus won't think to look." "That's one option," Harrison said slowly. "Or you could stay here." She looked up sharply. "What?" "I could use help around the ranch, Mrs. Patterson isn't getting any younger, and managing a spread like this alone is more work than one man can handle. You stay here, work for your keep, and anyone comes looking, we'll deal with them together." "You don't know me," Nathaniel protested. "I could be anyone. A thief, a liar, worse." "You could be," Harrison agreed. "But I don't think you are. I'm pretty good at reading people, Miss Crowley. Comes from spending most of my life around animals. They don't lie about who they are, and neither do you. I see someone who's been through hell and came out fighting. That's the kind of person I want on my side." Nathaniel stared at him, searching for the angle, the hidden price. Men like Marcus had taught her that nothing came free, that every act of kindness had strings attached that would tighten around your throat when you least expected it. But Harrison's bronze eyes were clear and steady, and she couldn't find anything in them except honest offering. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you risk your ranch, your safety, for a stranger?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where morning light painted the valley gold. "My mother ran away from a bad situation when I was 10 years old. She took me with her, traveled all the way from Missouri to Wyoming territory with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a determination to build something better. We met a rancher named Samuel Vance who gave us both work and safety. He married my mother 2 years later, adopted me as his own son, gave us a life we never could have had otherwise." He looked back at Nathaniel. "Samuel died 5 years ago, left me this ranch. My mother passed the year after. But I learned from both of them that sometimes the right thing to do is give someone a chance when they need it most. So that's what I'm offering you. A chance." The weight of his words settled over Nathaniel like a blanket, heavy but not suffocating. For the first time in years, she felt something crack in the careful walls she had built around herself. Not breaking, not yet, but definitely fracturing. "All right," she said softly. "I'll stay, at least until I'm healed and we know if Marcus sends more men." "Fair enough," Harrison said, and his slow smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow more real. "Welcome to the Vance Ranch, Nathaniel Crowley." The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm that Nathaniel had almost forgotten could exist. She couldn't do much with her injured shoulder, but she helped Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen, learning to make bread that didn't taste like saddle leather and stews that used every part of the meat. The older woman talked while they worked, sharing stories about Harrison's childhood, about his mother's strength and Samuel's quiet wisdom. "That boy out there," Mrs. Patterson said one afternoon as they watched Harrison work with a young colt in the corral. "He's got his father's heart. Not his blood father, mind you. From what Evelyn told me, that man was nothing but trouble. But Samuel Vance, he taught Harrison what it means to be a good man. How to be strong without being cruel, how to be firm without being hard." Nathaniel watched Harrison move around the skittish colt, his movements slow and predictable, his voice a low murmur that seemed to calm the animal's nerves. There was patience in every gesture, a kind of fundamental decency that seemed woven into his bones. It made something ache in her chest, though she couldn't quite name the feeling. "He's never married?" Nathaniel asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Patterson gave her a knowing look. "Had a girl once, about 5 years back, Sarah Mitchum, daughter of a rancher down in Cheyenne. But she wanted city life, wanted fancy things and society parties. Harrison offered to take her east, said he'd sell the ranch and start over somewhere else if that's what she needed. But she said no. Said she couldn't ask him to give up his home, and she couldn't pretend to be happy in a place that would always feel like exile to her." The older woman shook her head. "Broke his heart, but he understood. That's Harrison. He understands things that most men don't even try to see." That evening, after Mrs. Patterson had retired to her cottage behind the main house, Nathaniel found Harrison on the front porch, watching the stars emerge over the mountains. She settled into the chair beside him, moving carefully to avoid jarring her shoulder. "Your housekeeper told me about Sarah Mitchum," Nathaniel said quietly. Harrison glanced at her, something flickering across his face. "Mrs. Patterson talks too much sometimes. She cares about you, I know." He was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Sarah made the right choice. We both knew it, even if it hurt like hell at the time. You can't build a life with someone when you want completely different things. Love isn't always enough to bridge that kind of gap." "Do you think love is ever enough?" Nathaniel asked. "Or is it just something we tell ourselves to make the disappointment easier?" Harrison turned to look at her fully, and in the dim light from the house, his expression was serious. "I think love is necessary but not sufficient. You need respect too, and trust and shared dreams. You need to see each other as equals, as partners. Without those things, love just becomes another kind of prison." Nathaniel felt something twist behind her ribs. "I thought I loved Marcus when I married him. Or maybe I just loved the idea of being safe, of having someone to take care of me after my parents died. By the time I realized the difference, it was too late." "It's not too late now," Harrison said gently. "You got out. You survived. That takes more courage than most people have." "I'm not brave," Nathaniel said, her voice barely audible. "Brave people don't wait 2 years before they run." Harrison reached out and covered her hand with his, the touch warm and solid and entirely without demand. "Brave people are just scared people who keep going anyway." "You kept going, Nathaniel. That counts for everything." She looked down at their joined hands, at the calluses on his palm and the fading scars on her knuckles. Something was growing between them, something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She knew she should pull away, should maintain the distance that had kept her safe for so long. But for the first time in years, she didn't want to be safe. She wanted to be seen, to be known, to be real. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Harrison squeezed her hand gently before letting go. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll see about teaching you to ride again. Can't work a ranch if you're afraid of horses." Nathaniel smiled, and it felt strange on her face, like muscles she had forgotten how to use. "I'm not afraid of horses. Horses make sense. They're honest about their intentions." "Unlike people," Harrison said with understanding. "Unlike most people," Nathaniel corrected. "You're different." She went inside before he could respond, but she felt his gaze on her back, warm and steady as sunlight. The days stretched into weeks, and Nathaniel's shoulder healed cleanly. She started helping with more of the ranch work, learning to rope and brand, to read the weather and the health of the cattle. Harrison was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid for not knowing things that were second nature to him. He showed her how to read tracks, how to predict where the herd would drift, how to spot signs of illness or injury before they became serious problems. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, and in the quiet moments between tasks, they talked. Harrison told her about growing up on the move, about the fear and uncertainty of those years before Samuel Vance gave them sanctuary. Nathaniel told him about her childhood in a small Kansas town, about losing her parents to cholera and having nowhere to turn except to Marcus Crowley's calculated charm. "He wasn't cruel at first," Nathaniel said one afternoon as they rode fence line together, checking for breaks. "Or maybe he was, but he was clever about hiding it. Small criticisms that seemed like helpful advice, little restrictions that seemed like protection. By the time I realized I was trapped, he had control of everything. My money, my freedom, even my name." "You took his name," Harrison said. "It wasn't a question. I had nothing else," Nathaniel said. "No family, no resources. The marriage gave me legal standing, or so I thought. Turns out the law doesn't care much about women when their husbands have enough money to buy cooperation." She paused, her hands tight on the reins. "I tried to leave once before. About a year ago. Made it as far as the train station before his men found me. Marcus locked me in our bedroom for a month. Said it was for my own good, that I was hysterical and needed rest." Harrison's jaw went tight, but his voice remained controlled. "You're free of him now. Whatever it takes, Nathaniel, you're free." But neither of them truly believed that Marcus Crowley would simply let his wife disappear. The question wasn't if he would send more men. It was when. The answer came on a crisp September morning, 6 weeks after Nathaniel had arrived at the ranch. Harrison was working in the barn when he heard horses approaching, multiple riders moving at a steady pace. He set down the harness he had been mending and reached for the rifle he kept near the door, his movements calm and deliberate. Nathaniel emerged from the house, her face pale but composed. She had been expecting this. They both had. 5 men rode into the yard, their clothes dusty from hard travel but expensive enough to mark them as something more than ordinary drifters. The man in front was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of cold eyes that came from years of doing things that ordinary people couldn't stomach. "Morning," the man said, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of courtesy. "Name's Raymond Pike. I'm looking for someone." Woman, about 25, dark hair, green eyes, goes by Nathaniel Crowley. Heard she might have passed through these parts a few weeks back. Harrison stepped forward, the rifle held loose but ready. "You heard wrong. Nobody by that name here." Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's interesting, because we tracked her to within 5 miles of this ranch back in July, and the men I sent after her, well, they never came back. Now that seems like quite a coincidence, doesn't it?" Men disappear in these territories all the time, Harrison said flatly. Could have fallen prey to any number of dangers. Mountains don't much care about a man's intentions. True enough, Pike agreed. He shifted in his saddle, his gaze moving past Harrison to where Nathaniel stood on the porch. His eyes narrowed. That woman there looks an awful lot like the person I'm searching for. That woman is my wife, Harrison said, the lie coming smoothly. Has been for the past month. If you're looking for someone, you'll have to look elsewhere. Nathaniel's breath caught, but she understood immediately what Harrison was doing. Under frontier law, a married woman was the property of her husband. If she was legally married to Harrison, Marcus's claim became murky at best. It was a dangerous gamble, but it might buy them time. Pike studied them both for a long moment. Your wife. That's convenient. I don't suppose you have papers to prove this marriage, filed with the county clerk in Cody 2 days ago, Harrison said without hesitation. You're welcome to ride into town and check. Justice Harmon performed the ceremony. He'll confirm everything. It was pure bluff. There were no papers, no ceremony, no legal marriage. But Pike didn't know that, and the confidence in Harrison's voice sold the lie better than any documentation could have. Mr. Crowley's not going to like this, Pike said finally. He's been looking for his wife for months now, worried sick about her. Then Mr. Crowley should have treated his wife better when he had her, Nathaniel said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, though Harrison could see her hands trembling at her sides. I'm not going back to Kansas, Mr. Pike. Not now, not ever. You can tell Marcus that I died in the mountains or ran away to California or whatever story helps him sleep at night, but I'm done being his property. Pike's expression hardened. Mrs. Crowley, your husband has legal rights. The law is on his side. The law is wherever money says it is, Nathaniel shot back. But we're not in Kansas anymore. Wyoming territory has its own laws and its own ideas about what's right. I've made my choice. I'm staying here. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Harrison's finger rested near the trigger of his rifle, and he could see 2 of Pike's men shifting their hands toward their own weapons. This could turn violent in a heartbeat, and once it did, there would be no going back. Then Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway behind Nathaniel, a shotgun cradled in her arms with the casual competence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. Seems like the lady's made herself clear, gentlemen. Now, I'm a God-fearing woman, but I'm also a practical one. You've got 5 seconds to start riding back the way you came, or we're going to have a problem that won't end well for anyone. Pike looked from Mrs. Patterson to Harrison to Nathaniel, calculating odds and consequences. Finally, he touched his hat again and gathered his reins. This isn't over, Mrs. Crowley, or Mrs. Vance, or whoever you're pretending to be today. Your husband has a long reach and a longer memory. He'll get you back one way or another. He's welcome to try, Harrison said quietly, but he'll have to go through me first. Pike's smile was thin and cold. We'll see, Cowboy, we'll see. They watched the riders disappear down the valley road, nobody moving until the dust had settled and the sound of hooves had faded completely. Then Nathaniel's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the porch steps, her whole body shaking. Harrison set the rifle aside and crouched down in front of her, his hands gentle on her arms. You're all right. They're gone. They'll come back, Nathaniel said through chattering teeth. Marcus won't give up. He never gives up. Then we'll deal with them when they come, Harrison said firmly. But right now we need to make that lie into truth. We need to actually get married. Nathaniel's eyes went wide. What, Harrison? No, I can't ask you to do that. To tie yourself to me legally when Marcus could bring 1,000 kinds of trouble down on your head. You're not asking, I'm offering. Harrison took her hands in his thumbs stroking over her knuckles. Listen to me, Nathaniel. These past 6 weeks, having you here, working beside you, talking with you every day, it's been the best time I've had since my mother died. You're smart and strong, and you make me laugh even when everything seems hard. I'm not proposing out of obligation or pity. I'm proposing because I want you to stay, not as a hired hand, not as someone passing through, but as my partner, my wife, my equal in everything. Tears streamed down Nathaniel's face, and she couldn't tell if they were from fear or relief or something else entirely. You don't know everything about me. There are things I haven't told you. Then tell me now, Harrison said gently. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Nathaniel took a shaking breath, and the words she had been holding inside for so long came tumbling out. I can't give you children. Marcus took me to a doctor in Kansas City after I lost the baby. The doctor said there was damage, that I would never carry a pregnancy to term. Marcus blamed me, said I was defective, worthless. It's one of the reasons he was so angry when I left. He wanted an heir and I couldn't give him one. The silence that followed felt enormous. Nathaniel waited for Harrison's expression to change, for disappointment or anger to cloud his eyes, but he just looked at her with the same steady warmth he always had. Nathaniel, he said quietly, I'm not marrying you to get children. I'm marrying you because you're the first person in 5 years who's made me want to build a future with someone. Because when I think about the next 40 years of my life, I want you there beside me. That's enough. You're enough. You're already everything I need. The words broke something open inside Nathaniel, some last desperate defense that had been holding her together through years of pain and loneliness. She bent forward, sobbing against Harrison's shoulder as he wrapped his arms around her and held her while the storm passed through. I'm scared, she whispered when she could speak again. I'm so scared of this, of wanting something good, because every time I've wanted anything, it's been taken away. I know, Harrison murmured against her hair. I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared and hopeful than safe and alone. Say yes, Nathaniel. Marry me. Let's build something real together. She pulled back just enough to see his face, to search his eyes for any hint of deception or doubt. She found neither, just honesty and hope, and something that looked an awful lot like love. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Harrison's smile was like sunrise, bright and transforming. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and careful, a promise rather than a demand. Nathaniel kissed him back, tasting salt and hope and the beginning of something she had thought she would never have again. They were married 3 days later in the small church in Cody, with Mrs. Patterson and Doc Henley standing as witnesses. Justice Harmon performed the ceremony, bemused when Harrison explained that he needed the paperwork backdated by several weeks for legal purposes. The older man asked no questions, just filled out the marriage certificate with the earlier date and handed it over with a knowing look. You two take care of each other, he said. Marriage is work, but it's good work when you've got the right partner. Nathaniel wore a simple dress of pale blue that Mrs. Patterson had altered from one of Evelyn Vance's old gowns. Harrison wore his best shirt, and the suit coat his father had left him, brushed clean of dust and carefully pressed. They stood together before the altar, hands joined, and spoke vows that felt less like promises and more like acknowledgement of something that already existed between them. When Justice Harmon pronounced them married, Harrison kissed his wife with a gentleness that made Nathaniel's heart ache with the beauty of it. This was what marriage should be, she thought. Not ownership or obligation, but partnership and choice and mutual respect. The celebration was small. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a special dinner, and Doc Henley brought a bottle of French wine he had been saving for a worthy occasion. They toasted the newlyweds and shared stories late into the evening, laughter echoing through the ranch house until the stars wheeled overhead and exhaustion finally drove everyone to their beds. Harrison carried Nathaniel up the stairs to the bedroom they would now share, the same room where she had spent those first fevered days after being shot. The space felt different now, transformed from a sanctuary into a beginning. He set her down carefully beside the bed, his hands lingering on her waist. "We don't have to do anything tonight," he said softly. "I know this is all happening fast, and if you need time to adjust, I understand." Nathaniel reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I've had 2 years of a marriage that was nothing but pain and control. I don't want to wait any longer to find out what it feels like when it's right." She kissed him, putting into the touch everything she couldn't quite say out loud. Harrison responded with a hunger tempered by patience, his hands moving over her body with reverent care, mapping the shape of her through the fabric of her dress. When they finally came together, skin to skin in the darkness of their room, it was with a sweetness that made Nathaniel cry again, but this time from joy rather than sorrow. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Harrison's hand tracing idle patterns on Nathaniel's back while she pressed her ear to his chest and listened to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I never knew it could be like that," she whispered. "Gentle, equal, like both people mattered." Harrison pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You matter, Nathaniel. You've always mattered. I'm sorry it took so long for someone to show you that." "Better late than never," she said, and felt his chest rumble with quiet laughter. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time in years, Nathaniel didn't have nightmares. The autumn passed in a blur of work and slow, steady happiness. Nathaniel learned the rhythms of the ranch, becoming more confident in her abilities with each passing day. Harrison taught her to shoot, spending long afternoons at the makeshift range behind the barn until she could hit a target at 100 yards. It wasn't for sport. They both knew that if Marcus sent more men or sent them better prepared, they would need every advantage they could get. But as October turned to November and the first snows dusted the mountains, no more riders appeared. Nathaniel began to let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, Marcus had given up. That pike had delivered his message, and Marcus had decided his pride wasn't worth the trouble of pursuing a wife who clearly wanted nothing to do with him. Harrison was more cautious. "Men like that don't give up easy," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, Nathaniel's feet in his lap while he rubbed warmth back into her cold toes. "He's planning something. We just don't know what yet." "Maybe he's decided to cut his losses," Nathaniel suggested, though even she didn't quite believe it. "Maybe," Harrison agreed, but his eyes were troubled. The answer came in mid-December, delivered by a lawyer from Cheyenne who arrived on the afternoon stage. His name was Theodore Morrison, and he carried a leather briefcase stuffed with legal documents that he spread across the Vance kitchen table with the gravity of a man presenting evidence at a murder trial. "Mrs. Crowley," he began, and Harrison immediately interrupted. "That's Mrs. Vance, my wife." Morrison barely glanced at him. "Yes, well, that's actually what I'm here to discuss. Mr. Marcus Crowley has filed a petition with the territorial courts claiming that your marriage to Mrs. Crowley is invalid due to the fact that she was still legally married to him at the time. He's seeking an annulment of your marriage and an order for Mrs. Crowley to be returned to his custody." Nathaniel felt the color drain from her face. "That's not possible. I left him. The marriage was over." "Unfortunately, Mrs. Crowley, personal feelings don't constitute legal separation. You never filed for divorce. There was no court order dissolving your marriage to Mr. Crowley, which means that when you married Mr. Vance here, you were technically committing bigamy." Harrison stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. That's ridiculous. Marcus Crowley was abusive. He held her prisoner. She had every right to leave. Perhaps, Morrison said, his tone maddeningly reasonable. But that's something that would need to be proven in court, and I should warn you, Mr. Crowley has considerable resources. He's retained lawyers in both Kansas and Wyoming territory. He's prepared to drag this case through every level of the judiciary system. The cost alone would bankrupt most small ranchers. What does he want? Nathaniel asked quietly. Her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Morrison pulled out another document. Mr. Crowley is willing to grant you a divorce on the following conditions. First, you return to Kansas and remain there for a period of 6 months while the divorce is finalized. Second, you agree to forfeit any claim to his property or assets. And third, you sign a statement saying that all allegations of abuse or mistreatment were false, and that you left of your own volition due to mental instability. He wants her to lie, Harrison said flatly. To publicly humiliate herself and give up 6 months of her life just to get free of a marriage that should never have been legal in the first place. He wants closure, Morrison corrected, and he's willing to be quite generous if Mrs. Crowley cooperates. However, if she refuses, he's prepared to press criminal charges for bigamy and theft. Apparently, several pieces of jewelry went missing when Mrs. Crowley departed, valuable pieces that Mr. Crowley claims were family heirlooms. That's a lie, Nathaniel said, her voice shaking with anger. I took nothing but the clothes on my back and a horse he considered worthless anyway. Morrison shrugged. Again, that would need to be proven in court, and I can tell you from experience, Mrs. Crowley, that courts tend to believe wealthy men over desperate women, especially when those women have admittedly run away and remarried without securing a legal divorce. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nathaniel could feel the trap closing around her, Marcus's long reach extending all the way from Kansas to this small ranch in Wyoming territory. He had found her, and now he was going to make her pay for having the audacity to leave. How long do we have to decide? Harrison asked, his voice carefully controlled. Mr. Crowley is generously allowing 1 week for a response. After that, he'll proceed with legal action. Morrison gathered his papers and tucked them back into his briefcase. I'll return next Monday for your answer. I'd advise you to consider his offer seriously. Fighting this will cost you everything, and you'll likely lose anyway. After the lawyer left, Nathaniel sat at the table with her head in her hands while Harrison paced the kitchen like a caged animal. The rage and helplessness coming off him in waves was palpable. There has to be a way to fight this, he said. We can hire our own lawyer, present evidence of abuse, show that the marriage was invalid from the start. With what money? Nathaniel asked dully. Morrison was right. Marcus can drag this out for years. He'll bleed us dry just in legal fees, and at the end he'll probably still win. The law is on his side. It always has been. Then we run, Harrison said. Pack up tonight and head west, California, Oregon, somewhere so far away that even Marcus Crowley's reach can't find us. And give up your ranch, your home, everything your parents built. Nathaniel shook her head. I won't let you do that. This is my problem, Harrison. I should be the one to pay for it. Harrison stopped pacing and knelt down in front of her, taking her hands in his. Listen to me. You are not going back to Kansas. You're not spending 6 months in that bastard's custody, and you're sure as hell not signing papers that call you a liar and a thief. We're married, Nathaniel. That means we face problems together, both of us or neither of us. There's no way to win this, Nathaniel whispered. Tears tracked down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. Marcus always wins. That's what he does. He finds your weakness and he uses it against you until you break. Then maybe it's time someone showed him what happens when people don't break, Harrison said fiercely. He stood and pulled Nathaniel up with him, wrapping his arms around her and holding her tight. We're going to fight this. I don't know how yet, but we'll find a way. You're not alone anymore. Remember that. Nathaniel buried her face in his shoulder and held on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had started spinning out of control. Over the next 3 days, Harrison rode into Cody and sent telegrams to every lawyer and judge he could think of, searching for someone who might be willing to take their case. The responses were universally discouraging. Marcus Crowley's reputation preceded him. Nobody wanted to go up against a man with that much money and influence, especially not on behalf of a woman with questionable legal standing. On the 4th day, Doc Henley appeared at the ranch with unexpected company. The man he brought with him was elderly, probably close to 70, with white hair and eyes that held the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent decades watching people and learning their secrets. Harrison, Nathaniel, this is Judge William Cartwright. He's retired now, but he served on the territorial bench for 30 years. I thought he might be able to help. They invited the judge inside and explained the situation, laying out Morrison's visit and Marcus's demands. Cartwright listened without interrupting, his weathered fingers steepled beneath his chin. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Marcus Crowley, he said finally. I've heard of him, nasty piece of work from what I understand. Built his empire on the backs of desperate people and considers himself untouchable. The judge leaned back in his chair. The legal situation is tricky. Morrison's right that technically Mrs. Vance here was still married when she wed you, Harrison. That could be problematic. So you're saying we can't win, Nathaniel said, defeat heavy in her voice. I'm saying you can't win if you play by Marcus Crowley's rules, Cartwright corrected. But there are other rules, older ones. I did some research after Doc Henley came to see me. Did you know that Wyoming Territory has some of the most progressive laws regarding women's rights in the nation? We gave women the vote back in 1869. We allow women to own property, to serve on juries, to hold public office. The territorial government takes a dim view of men who try to exert unlawful control over their wives. What are you saying? Harrison leaned forward, hope beginning to kindle in his chest. I'm saying that if you can prove Marcus Crowley was abusive, if you can show that Nathaniel was fleeing a genuinely dangerous situation, the territorial courts might be sympathetic to an argument of constructive abandonment. Essentially, that Marcus's behavior nullified the marriage contract, making Nathaniel free to remarry without formal divorce proceedings. But how do we prove it? Nathaniel asked. It was just him and me behind closed doors, no witnesses, no evidence. Are you sure about that? Cartwright's gaze was penetrating. No servants who saw bruises, no friends you confided in, no doctors who treated suspicious injuries. Nathaniel's breath caught. There was a housekeeper, Clara Jensen. She walked in on Marcus hitting me once about 3 months before I ran. He fired her the next day, but she saw what happened. And there was a doctor in Dodge City who set my broken ribs after Marcus pushed me down the stairs. Dr. Samuel Patterson. He asked questions, wanted to report it, but I begged him not to. I was too afraid of what Marcus would do. If we can get statements from these people, sworn affidavits attesting to what they witnessed, we might have a case, Cartwright said. It's not guaranteed. Marcus will fight back hard and he'll have lawyers who make Morrison look like a country bumpkin. But it's a chance. Harrison looked at Nathaniel, seeing the war of hope and fear playing out across her features. What do you want to do? He asked gently. She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. I want to fight. I'm done running, done letting Marcus control my life even from a distance. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Then we have work to do, Cartwright said with grim satisfaction. First thing tomorrow, we start gathering evidence and witnesses. Harrison, you'll need to ride to Kansas. It's risky, but we need those affidavits in person. Written testimony isn't enough. We need Clara Jensen and Dr. Patterson willing to testify in court. I'll go, Nathaniel said immediately. They're my witnesses. I should be the one to ask. Absolutely not, Harrison and Cartwright said simultaneously. Marcus's men are watching for you, Harrison continued. The moment you set foot in Kansas, you'll be arrested on those trumped-up theft charges. But I'm just a concerned husband investigating his wife's past. They won't have any legal grounds to hold me. Nathaniel wanted to argue, but she knew they were right. The thought of Harrison walking into Marcus's territory made her sick with fear, but there was no other option. Harrison left 2 days later, riding hard for the train station in Cheyenne, with a leather folder full of legal papers and Cartwright's letters of introduction. Nathaniel watched him go with her heart in her throat, terrified that she was sending him into danger she couldn't protect him from. The waiting was agony. Mrs. Patterson did her best to keep Nathaniel occupied with ranch work and holiday preparations. Christmas was only a week away, though the season felt hollow without Harrison there to share it. Nathaniel threw herself into chores with desperate energy, anything to avoid thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Harrison reached Dodge City after 3 days of hard traveling. The town was exactly as Nathaniel had described it, a sprawling collection of saloons and gambling houses built around the railroad tracks that carried cattle east and money west. Marcus Crowley's name was everywhere, stamped on businesses and whispered in conversations. The man owned this town in every way that mattered. Finding Clara Jensen took most of a day. She had married after being fired and now lived on a small farm outside town with her husband and 3 children. When Harrison explained why he had come, the woman's weathered face went pale. "Mr. Crowley will destroy us if he finds out I talked to you," she said, her hands twisting in her apron. "Mr. Crowley is trying to force my wife back into a marriage that nearly killed her," Harrison replied quietly. "I know I'm asking you to risk a lot, Mrs. Jensen." But Nathaniel risked everything to get free. She deserves someone willing to stand up and tell the truth about what happened to her. Clara looked at her husband, who had been listening silently from the doorway. The man nodded slowly. "Tell him what you saw, Clara. We'll deal with whatever comes." So Clara told her story, every brutal detail, while Harrison took notes and Judge Cartwright's appointed notary recorded everything for the legal record. She described finding Marcus beating Nathaniel in their bedroom, the viciousness of the attack, the cold way Marcus had threatened Clara to keep her silent. By the time she finished, there were tears streaming down her face. "That poor girl," she whispered. "I've prayed for her every day since I left that house. Prayed she'd find a way out. Is she safe now?" "Is she all right?" "She's safe," Harrison promised. "And she's stronger than Marcus ever gave her credit for. Finding Dr. Samuel Patterson was easier." The elderly physician still maintained his practice on Dodge City's Main Street, and he remembered Nathaniel immediately. "I knew that girl was in trouble," he said after reading Cartwright's letter. "Seen too many women come through my office with injuries that didn't match their stories. But she wouldn't let me help, too afraid. Is she willing to fight him now?" "We both are," Harrison said. Dr. Patterson nodded slowly. "Then I'll testify. About the broken ribs, the bruises, the signs of prolonged abuse I documented in my records. Marcus Crowley's influence doesn't extend as far as he thinks it does. There are still people in this town who remember what justice means." Harrison spent one more day in Dodge City, gathering additional affidavits from shopkeepers and neighbors who had witnessed Nathaniel's increasing isolation and Marcus's controlling behavior. By the time he boarded the train back to Wyoming, he carried a folder thick with testimony that painted a picture of systematic abuse and imprisonment. He also carried a warning from Dr. Patterson. "Watch yourself, young man. Marcus knows someone's been asking questions. He's not the type to let challenges go unanswered." Harrison made it back to Cody 2 days before Christmas, exhausted but triumphant. Nathaniel met him at the door and threw herself into his arms, relief and joy overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. "Did you get them?" she asked against his shoulder. "Did they agree?" "Every single one," Harrison said, pulling back to look at her face. "Clara Jensen, Dr. Patterson, 4 others who witnessed different aspects of what Marcus did to you. Cartwright says we have a strong case." That night, they sat with Judge Cartwright in the ranch house study and reviewed all the evidence Harrison had gathered. The old judge read through each affidavit carefully, his expression growing more satisfied with each page. "This is good," he said finally. "Very good. With this testimony, we can argue that Nathaniel was fleeing genuine danger, that the marriage to Marcus was void due to his breach of the marital contract through abuse and false imprisonment. We file a petition with the territorial court seeking to validate your marriage to Harrison and simultaneously seeking a divorce from Marcus on the grounds of cruelty." "Will it work?" Nathaniel asked. "It should," Cartwright said carefully, "but Morrison was right that Marcus has deep pockets. He'll hire the best lawyers money can buy, and they'll do everything possible to discredit these witnesses and paint you as an unfaithful wife who abandoned her lawful husband. The hearing will be ugly, Nathaniel. They'll drag your reputation through the mud and make you relive every terrible moment of your marriage in open court. You need to be prepared for that." Nathaniel looked at Harrison, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I can do it. If it means being free of Marcus forever, I can survive anything." The hearing was set for mid-January in the territorial courthouse in Cheyenne. Morrison appeared at the ranch on the appointed day to collect their answer to Marcus's demands, and his expression curdled when Cartwright presented him with a counter-petition instead. "You're making a mistake," Morrison said coldly. "Mr. Crowley will crush you. He has resources you can't imagine." "Maybe," Harrison said evenly, "but we have the truth. Sometimes that's enough." The weeks leading up to the hearing were tense. Harrison hired 2 ranch hands to help maintain the property while he focused on preparing their case with Cartwright. Nathaniel practiced her testimony over and over, learning to speak about the worst moments of her marriage without breaking down. It was brutal work, like opening old wounds and pouring salt into them, but she forced herself to endure it. Christmas came and went quietly. Mrs. Patterson cooked a special dinner, and they exchanged small gifts by the fire. Harrison gave Nathaniel a silver locket with both their initials engraved on the back. She gave him a new pair of riding gloves she had stitched herself, the leather soft and perfectly fitted to his hands. It was a simple holiday, but it was theirs, and that made it precious. On January 15th, they traveled to Cheyenne with Judge Cartwright and Mrs. Patterson, who had insisted on coming along for moral support. The territorial courthouse was an imposing stone building that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who entered. Inside, the halls echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations, the machinery of justice grinding through cases with impersonal efficiency. Marcus Crowley arrived with an entourage that included 4 lawyers, Raymond Pike, and a handful of witnesses prepared to testify to Nathaniel's supposed instability and criminal behavior. When Nathaniel saw her former husband for the first time in 7 months, she felt her stomach twist with old fear and newer anger. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a cold way, his clothes expensive, his expression radiating the confidence of a man who had never lost anything he truly wanted. Marcus's eyes found her across the courthouse corridor, and his smile was like a knife blade. "Nathaniel, you're looking well. Running away clearly agrees with you." Harrison stepped slightly in front of his wife, his body language protective without being aggressive. "Mr. Crowley, I'm Harrison Vance, Nathaniel's husband, so I've heard," Marcus said smoothly. "Though I use the term husband loosely, considering my wife never bothered to divorce me before running off to play house with a backwoods rancher." "Your wife, as you call her, was fleeing for her life," Harrison said quietly, "but I suppose you already know that." Before Marcus could respond, the court bailiff appeared and announced that the hearing was beginning. They filed into the courtroom, taking seats on opposite sides of the aisle. The judge presiding was a stern-faced woman named Margaret Holloway, one of the first female judges in Wyoming Territory, and known for her no-nonsense approach to the law. The hearing lasted 3 days. Marcus's lawyers presented their case first, arguing that Nathaniel had abandoned her lawful marriage, stolen property, and committed bigamy by marrying Harrison while still legally bound to Marcus. They called witnesses who testified to Nathaniel's supposedly erratic behavior, her sudden departure, the heartbreak Marcus had suffered at losing his beloved wife. It was a masterful performance, each witness carefully coached to present Marcus as the grieving, wronged husband. Nathaniel sat through it with her hands clenched in her lap, Harrison's steady presence beside her the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Then it was their turn. Judge Cartwright stood and methodically dismantled Marcus's carefully constructed narrative. He called Clara Jensen first, and the former housekeeper's testimony was devastating. She described in clear, unflinching detail what she had witnessed: Marcus's violence, Nathaniel's fear, the atmosphere of control and terror that had pervaded the Crowley household. Marcus's lawyers tried to discredit her, suggesting she had been fired for theft and held a grudge against her former employer. But Clara held firm, her testimony backed up by the dates and details recorded in her own personal journal from that time. Dr. Patterson was next, and his testimony carried the weight of medical authority. He presented his records showing the injuries he had treated, the pattern of abuse that had escalated over time, his professional opinion that Nathaniel had been in genuine danger. Marcus's lawyers couldn't shake him. The old doctor had been practicing medicine for 40 years, and his reputation was unimpeachable. Finally, Cartwright called Nathaniel herself to the stand. This was the moment she had been dreading, but as she walked to the witness chair and placed her hand on the Bible to swear her oath, she felt something settle inside her. A kind of calm determination that came from knowing she was fighting for something that mattered. Under Cartwright's gentle questioning, Nathaniel told her story, all of it. The courtship that had seemed like salvation after her parents died, the gradual tightening of Marcus's control, the first time he hit her, apologizing afterward and swearing it would never happen again. The escalation over 2 years, until she was essentially a prisoner in her own home. The failed escape attempt that had resulted in a month locked in her bedroom. The night she finally managed to get away, stealing a horse and riding until she thought her heart would burst. She spoke about the miscarriage too, about Marcus's cold rage when the doctor told them she wouldn't be able to have children. How he had told her she was worthless, defective, that no other man would ever want her. But he was wrong, Nathaniel said, looking directly at Marcus across the courtroom. Harrison wanted me, not for what I could give him or how I could serve his purposes, but for who I am. That's what love is supposed to be, and I never knew that until I met him. Marcus's lawyers tried to break her on cross-examination, suggesting she was lying or exaggerating or mentally unstable. But Nathaniel had lived through 2 years of Marcus's gaslighting. She knew his tactics, and she refused to be shaken. Every question they asked, she answered with calm honesty. Every attempt to twist her words, she redirected with patient clarity. By the 3rd day, Judge Holloway had heard enough. She called both legal teams to the bench and spent 20 minutes reviewing documents and conferring with her clerk. The courtroom waited in tense silence. Nathaniel's hand gripped so tightly in Harrison's that both their fingers had gone numb. Finally, Judge Holloway returned to her bench and gavelled the room to order. I have reviewed all the testimony and evidence presented in this matter. This court finds that Nathaniel Crowley was subjected to systematic abuse and unlawful restraint during her marriage to Marcus Crowley. Furthermore, the evidence supports the conclusion that Mrs. Crowley fled a genuinely dangerous situation and had reasonable belief that her life was in danger. Marcus's lawyers stood up to object, but Holloway silenced them with a look. Under territorial law, a party to a marriage contract who breaches that contract through violence or false imprisonment forfeits their legal rights under said contract. Therefore, this court rules that Nathaniel Crowley's marriage to Marcus Crowley was effectively dissolved by his actions, regardless of whether formal divorce proceedings were initiated. Her subsequent marriage to Harrison Vance is legal and valid. The gavel came down with a crack like thunder. Furthermore, this court issues a permanent restraining order against Marcus Crowley. He is forbidden from contacting, approaching, or harassing Nathaniel Vance in any way. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. These proceedings are concluded. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Nathaniel turned to Harrison with tears streaming down her face, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her while she sobbed with relief and disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Across the aisle, Marcus stood frozen, his face twisted with rage. He started to move toward them, but Raymond Pike caught his arm and whispered something urgent in his ear. Marcus shook him off, but he didn't approach. Instead, he turned and walked out of the courtroom, his lawyers scrambling to follow, leaving behind the wreckage of his attempt to reclaim control over the woman he had never deserved. Judge Cartwright shook their hands with quiet satisfaction. "Well done, both of you. You fought well and you won. Go home and build the life you deserve." The journey back to Cody felt dreamlike. Nathaniel kept expecting to wake up and find it had all been wishful thinking, that she was still trapped in Marcus's house or running through the wilderness with bullets at her back. But Harrison's hand stayed steady in hers, solid and real, anchoring her to this new reality where she was truly free. Mrs. Patterson had stayed behind to mind the ranch, and when they arrived home, she had prepared a celebration dinner that could have fed a dozen people. They ate and drank and talked late into the night, recounting every moment of the hearing, marveling at the outcome that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. "What happens now?" Nathaniel asked later, lying in bed with her head on Harrison's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "Now we live," Harrison said simply. "We work the ranch, we build our home, we figure out what happiness looks like when you're not constantly looking over your shoulder." "It feels strange," Nathaniel admitted. "Being safe, being free, I keep waiting for something terrible to happen." Harrison pressed a kiss to her forehead. "It will take time for your mind to catch up with what your heart already knows, but I'll be here every day reminding you that this is real, that you're safe, that you're loved." "I love you too," Nathaniel whispered. It was the first time she had said the words, and they felt both terrifying and liberating. "I love you so much it scares me. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared. The kind that makes you brave instead of frozen." Harrison smiled in the darkness and pulled her closer. "Then we'll be brave together." Spring came to Wyoming with a fury of wildflowers and newborn calves. Nathaniel threw herself into the work of the ranch with a passion that transformed her from capable helper to true partner. She learned to read the land the way Harrison did, understanding the subtle signs of weather and season, knowing when to move the herd and when to let them graze. Her hands grew calloused and strong, her body lean from constant activity, her face tanned by the sun. In April, Harrison surprised her with a gift. He led her out to the eastern pasture where a small cabin was being built, the frame already up and the walls beginning to take shape. "I thought we could use it as a guest house," he explained. "But also, I was thinking. You said you can't have children of your own. That's fine. But there are children who need homes. Orphans, kids whose parents died of fever or accidents or just bad luck. If you wanted, we could offer them a place here. Not as laborers or charity cases, but as family." Nathaniel stared at the cabin, then at Harrison, then back at the cabin. "You want to take in orphans? Only if you want to," Harrison said quickly. "I know it's not the same as having your own children, and I don't want you to think I'm trying to replace something you lost. But I remember what it felt like to be a kid with nowhere to go, and how much it meant when Samuel Vance gave my mother and me a chance. I thought maybe we could do that for someone else." Tears blurred Nathaniel's vision, but she was smiling. "You're the best man I've ever known, Harrison Vance." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," she confirmed, and kissed him there in the spring sunshine, surrounded by the smell of fresh-cut timber and new beginnings. The cabin was finished by June, and in July they took in their first child. His name was James, a 9-year-old boy whose parents had died of consumption the previous winter. He was wary and defensive, expecting cruelty or indifference, the way too many orphans learn to expect nothing good from the world. But Nathaniel understood that wariness. She knew what it was like to be braced for pain, to trust nothing and no one. So she was patient with James, giving him space when he needed it and gentle consistency when he was ready to accept it. Harrison taught the boy to ride and rope, to care for the animals and read the weather. Mrs. Patterson made sure he was fed and clothed and educated, sitting with him every evening to work through reading and arithmetic. Slowly, over the course of that summer, James began to soften, to smile, to run to greet Harrison when he came in from the pastures, and to seek out Nathaniel when he was hurt or scared or just needed someone to listen. By autumn, he was calling them Ma and Pa without even thinking about it, and the sound made Nathaniel's heart feel too big for her chest. They took in 2 more children that year, sisters, aged 6 and 8, whose parents had been killed when their wagon overturned during a river crossing. The girls were inseparable and terrified, clinging to each other like drowning swimmers. Nathaniel made space for them in the guest cabin, set up beds side by side so they wouldn't be separated, and let them set the pace for their own healing. By the time winter arrived, the Vance ranch had grown from a household of 2 to a family of 7, counting Mrs. Patterson, who had become more grandmother than housekeeper. The ranch house rang with children's laughter and the organized chaos of meal times and homework and bedtime stories. On Christmas Eve, they gathered around the tree Harrison had cut from the mountains, the children hanging decorations they had made from scraps of fabric and carved wood. Nathaniel watched them with a fullness in her heart that felt like it might overflow. "You look happy," Harrison said softly, coming to stand beside her. "I am happy," Nathaniel said, and the truth of it still surprised her sometimes. I never thought I could be this happy. Never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything good in this world," Harrison told her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was finally quiet, Harrison and Nathaniel sat together by the dying fire. Snow fell softly outside the window, blanketing the valley in white silence. "You ever think about what your life would be like if you hadn't run?" Harrison asked. "If you had stayed in Kansas?" "Sometimes," Nathaniel admitted, "but not with regret. More like I think about the person I was then and how far I've come. That woman was so scared, so small in her own mind. She didn't think she deserved love or freedom or anything good. And now I know different," Nathaniel said. She turned to face Harrison fully, taking his hands in hers. "You showed me that love isn't about control or possession. It's about trust and respect and building something together. You gave me back myself, Harrison. I can never repay that." "You don't need to repay it," Harrison said. "Love isn't a debt. It's a gift freely given. And besides, you gave me just as much. Before you came here, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch because it was what I knew but not really living. You reminded me what it means to want something, to fight for something, to build a future that matters." They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from true companionship. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in quiet beauty. Inside, the house held warmth and safety and the promise of tomorrow. The years that followed were not without challenges. Running a ranch and raising children demanded constant work and vigilance. There were bad seasons when the cattle prices dropped and money grew tight. There were illnesses and injuries and the 100 small crises that came with family life. But through it all, Harrison and Nathaniel faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with every obstacle overcome. They took in more children over the years, some staying permanently and others just passing through until they found their own paths. James grew into a strong young man who eventually took over much of the ranch management, freeing Harrison and Nathaniel to focus on the younger children. The sisters, Emily and Sarah, grew up to become talented seamstresses, opening a shop in Cody that became famous throughout the territory for its beautiful work. By 1893, 10 years after that hot July day when a gunshot changed everything, the Vance Ranch was home to 8 children ranging from teenagers to toddlers. The original cabin had been expanded twice, and they were planning to build another structure to accommodate the growing family. Nathaniel was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Harrison came in from the fields, dusty and tired but smiling. He wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed the back of her neck, a familiar gesture that still made her shiver after all these years. "How was your day?" she asked, leaning back against him. "Good. James finished repairing the north fence and the new bull we bought is settling in nicely. How was yours?" "Chaotic," Nathaniel said with a laugh. "Little Michael fell in the creek again. Emily and Sarah are arguing about what color to paint their shop, and Mrs. Patterson is threatening to retire if we take in any more children. She says that every year," Harrison pointed out. "True," Nathaniel agreed. She turned in his arms to face him, struck as always by how much she loved this man. The years had added lines around his eyes and silver to his dark hair, but he was still the same steady, gentle person who had saved her life and then given her reasons to live it. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking me in that day, everything that came after." Harrison looked at her with such tenderness that it made her breath catch. "Nathaniel Vance, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and this family we've built together. I have never regretted a single moment. Even when Marcus tried to destroy us, even then." Because fighting for you, fighting for us, it taught me what really matters. Not land or money or what other people think. Just this, us. Family. Love that doesn't come with conditions or expectations. Nathaniel rose up on her toes and kissed him, pouring 10 years of gratitude and love and joy into the touch. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you," she said. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for showing me what I was worth." "You already had worth," Harrison corrected gently. "You just needed someone to remind you." That evening, after dinner and chores and the nightly ritual of getting 8 children to bed, Harrison and Nathaniel walked down to the creek that ran through their property. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air sweet with the smell of summer grass and distant pine. They sat on the bank, their shoulders touching, watching the water catch moonlight and throw it back in silver ripples. "You remember," Nathaniel said quietly, "that night after the lawyer came. When I told you I couldn't give you children and you said I already gave you everything." "I remember," Harrison confirmed. "I didn't believe you then. I thought you were just being kind, saying what I needed to hear to keep me from falling apart completely. And now I understand what you meant," Nathaniel said. She gestured back toward the house where their children slept, safe and loved and full of promise. "This family we've built, this life we're living, none of it would exist if we had chosen the traditional path. The children we've taken in, the future we've given them, it's better than anything I could have imagined. You were right, Harrison. I didn't give you children. I gave you something better. I gave you partnership and purpose and a reason to build something that matters." "We gave each other that," Harrison corrected. "All of it, together." They sat in peaceful silence, listening to the creek and the distant call of a night bird. After a while, Harrison spoke again. "You know what I think about sometimes? That moment when I saw those men chasing you, and I had to decide whether to get involved or stay out of it. I think about how different everything would be if I had made the other choice, if I had just let you run and not fired that shot." "Don't," Nathaniel said, touching his hand. "Don't think about that. You made the choice you made and it led us here. That's all that matters." "You're right," Harrison agreed. He laced his fingers through hers, their hands fitting together like they had been made for this exact purpose. "It's just, sometimes I'm overwhelmed by how grateful I am, how lucky I feel. Because that single decision, that split-second choice to help a stranger, it gave me everything I have now. You, our family, this life. It seems impossible that so much good could come from one small moment." "Maybe that's how life works," Nathaniel mused. "All these tiny moments that seem insignificant at the time, but they're actually the hinges that everything else swings on. If my horse hadn't died 5 miles from your ranch, if those men had been better shots, if you had been tracking a different mountain lion that day, any of it could have changed everything. But it didn't," Harrison said firmly. "We found each other, Nathaniel. Against all odds and reason, we found each other, and we fought for what we had. That matters. Our choices matter." Nathaniel nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in her bones. They had both made choices, over and over again. To trust, to fight, to build, to love. And those choices had created something beautiful and lasting. They stayed by the creek until the moon rose high overhead, talking about the future they were still building together. About James's plan to marry his sweetheart and possibly start his own ranch nearby. About Emily and Sarah's growing business and their dreams of eventually opening a shop in Cheyenne. About the youngest children and their endless questions and boundless energy. "We should probably get back," Nathaniel said eventually. "Michael has been having nightmares lately. He might wake up and need us." "You go ahead," Harrison said. "I'll be right behind you." Nathaniel kissed his cheek and headed back toward the house, her path lit by lamplight spilling from the windows. Harrison watched her go, this woman who had come into his life bleeding and desperate and somehow transformed everything into gold. He thought about that day again, the heat and dust, and the split-second decision to raise his rifle and fire. He thought about everything that had followed. The fear and fighting, the love and laughter, the slow building of trust and family and home. Some people might call it fate or divine intervention or simple luck. Harrison didn't know what to call it. He just knew that he was grateful down to his very soul for every moment that had led him here. He stood and brushed off his pants, preparing to follow his wife back to their home full of children and chaos and joy. As he walked, he could hear voices drifting from the house. Nathaniel singing a lullaby to one of the younger ones, James and Mrs. Patterson discussing tomorrow's work. The gentle sounds of a family settling in for the night. This was what happiness looked like, Harrison thought. Not perfect, not easy, but real and earned and precious beyond measure. They had built it together, he and Nathaniel, brick by brick and choice by choice. And they would keep building it for the rest of their lives. When he entered the house, Nathaniel was just coming down the stairs, having settled Michael back to sleep. She smiled when she saw him, and even after 10 years, that smile still had the power to make his heart skip. "Ready for bed?" she asked. "Always," Harrison replied, taking her hand. They climbed the stairs together, partners in every sense of the word. Behind them, the house held their family, safe and sleeping and dreaming of tomorrow. Ahead of them stretched years of challenges and joys, sorrows and celebrations, all the 1,000 ordinary moments that made up a life well lived, and through it all, they would have each other. That was enough. It had always been enough. In the darkness of their bedroom, wrapped in each other's arms, Nathaniel whispered again the words she had said that desperate night when she thought she had nothing to offer. "I can't give you children." And Harrison, as he had then and would for the rest of their lives, whispered back the truth that had become the foundation of everything they had built together. "You already give me everything." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The creek sang its endless song. The mountains stood eternal watch over the valley. And in a small ranch house in Wyoming territory, two people who had found each other against all odds slept peacefully, surrounded by the family they had chosen and the love they had earned. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations and the steady rhythm of ranch life. Harrison and Nathaniel grew older together, their partnership deepening with each passing year. They saw their oldest children grow into adults, starting families and lives of their own while remaining close to the home that had given them shelter and love. James married his sweetheart Lucy in a ceremony on the ranch, with all the family gathered to celebrate. They built a house on the eastern edge of the Vance property and started raising cattle of their own, partnering with Harrison to expand the operation. Emily and Sarah's seamstress shop became one of the most successful businesses in Cody, employing several other young women and earning a reputation that extended throughout Wyoming and beyond. More children came through the Vance home over the years, some staying and some moving on, but all carrying with them the knowledge that they had been loved and valued and given a chance to become whoever they were meant to be. The ranch became known throughout the territory as a place where orphaned or abandoned children could find safety and opportunity. By 1903, 20 years after that fateful day, Harrison and Nathaniel were in their 50s, their hair gone silver and their hands weathered by decades of hard work. But their love had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, tempered by years of facing life's challenges together and emerging stronger for it. They were sitting on the porch one autumn evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson when a rider appeared on the road. As he drew closer, Nathaniel recognized him with a shock. It was Raymond Pike, the man Marcus had sent to find her all those years ago. Harrison stood immediately, his body tense, but Pike raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Easy, Mr. Vance. I'm not here to cause trouble, I just came to deliver news." "What news?" Harrison asked warily. Pike dismounted slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. He looked older, worn down by time and perhaps by conscience. "Marcus Crowley died 3 weeks ago. Heart attack, the doctors said. He never remarried after Mrs. Vance left him. Spent the last 20 years of his life bitter and alone, drinking himself to death one glass at a time." Nathaniel felt an odd mixture of emotions. Not grief, certainly, but not quite the satisfaction she might have expected either. Just a sense of closure, of a door finally swinging shut on the darkest chapter of her life. "Why are you telling us this?" she asked. Pike pulled an envelope from his jacket. "He left instructions with his lawyers. This was to be delivered to you after his death. I volunteered to bring it personally. Figured I owed you that much after everything." Nathaniel took the envelope with trembling hands. After Pike left, declining their offer of a meal and a place to stay for the night, she and Harrison sat together and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Marcus's familiar handwriting, though shakier now, the letters formed by an unsteady hand. The letter was short. "Nathaniel, I spent 20 years hating you for leaving me, blaming you for every failure and disappointment in my life. But the truth is, you were right to run. I was cruel. I was controlling. I tried to make you into something you weren't because I couldn't accept that love means letting people be free. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now, at the end, what I lost when I lost you. Not a possession or a trophy, but a person. A good person who deserved better than what I gave her. I hope you found happiness after you left. I hope you found someone who could love you the way I never learned how. Marcus." Nathaniel read the letter twice, then handed it to Harrison without comment. He read it carefully, then set it aside and pulled her close. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "Sad," Nathaniel said after a moment's thought. Not for him, really, but for all the wasted years. All the pain that didn't need to happen. He could have been different if he had chosen to be, but he didn't choose it until it was too late to matter. "You forgive him?" Nathaniel considered the question seriously. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. I don't hate him anymore. I stopped hating him years ago because holding on to that anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. But forgiveness implies that what he did was somehow acceptable if he apologized, and it wasn't. It never was." "Then what do you feel?" Harrison asked. "Free," Nathaniel said finally. "Completely, entirely free. He was the last shadow from my old life, and now even that is gone. All that's left is this, us, our family, our life. Everything good and real and true." She took the letter and walked to the fireplace, feeding it into the flames. They watched it burn together, the paper curling and blackening and finally disintegrating into ash. The past finally laid to rest. That winter was harsh, with heavy snows that kept them close to the ranch house for weeks at a time. But inside, the home was warm and full of life. Grandchildren now ran through the halls, James and Lucy's 3 children and Emily's twins. The house rang with laughter and arguments and the wonderful chaos of a large, loving family. On Christmas morning, Nathaniel looked around at the scene of joyful mayhem. Children tearing into presents, adults exchanging knowing smiles over coffee, the smell of Mrs. Patterson's famous cinnamon rolls filling the air. This was what she had dreamed of during those dark days in Kansas, though she hadn't had words for it then. This sense of belonging, of purpose, of being surrounded by people who loved her not for what she could provide but simply for who she was. Harrison appeared at her elbow, pressing a cup of coffee into her hands. "What you thinking about?" "Everything," Nathaniel said, leaning against him. "How far we've come, how much we've built, how grateful I am for all of it." "Me too," Harrison said. He wrapped his arm around her waist and they stood together, watching their family celebrate. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" "What?" "That I was tracking that particular mountain lion on that particular day, that I made the choice to help instead of looking away. That you made the choice to trust me, to stay, to build this life with me." "Best choices we ever made," Nathaniel agreed. "The best," Harrison confirmed. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Merry Christmas, Nathaniel Vance." "Merry Christmas, Harrison Vance," she replied, and her heart was so full of love and gratitude that she thought it might burst. The years continued their steady march forward. Harrison and Nathaniel grew older gracefully, their bodies slowing but their spirits remaining strong. They passed more of the ranch responsibilities to James and the other children who had chosen to stay nearby. But they remained active and engaged in the life of the family they had built. On a warm summer evening in 1910, nearly 30 years after they had first met, Harrison and Nathaniel sat together in their favorite spot by the creek. They came here often now, drawn by the peaceful sound of the water and the memories of all the conversations they had shared on this bank over the decades. "You remember," Harrison said, "that first night I brought you here, after the hearing when we had finally won?" "I remember," Nathaniel said, her hand finding his automatically. "I remember thinking that I couldn't believe it was real, that I had actually won, that I was actually free. And now I don't even think about it anymore," Nathaniel said with wonder in her voice. "It's just my life. This beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life. I wake up every morning next to you, I work alongside our family, I go to sleep at night grateful for every moment. The past feels like it happened to a different person." "In a way it did," Harrison said thoughtfully. "We're not the same people we were 30 years ago. We've grown and changed and become who we were always meant to be." Nathaniel nodded, watching the water flow past. The creek had been here long before they arrived and would continue long after they were gone, an eternal constant in a world of change. It was comforting somehow, being part of something larger than themselves. "Harrison," she said quietly, "thank you." "For what?" "For everything. For saving my life that day. For giving me a home and a family and a reason to believe in goodness again. For showing me what love really means. For building this life with me." Harrison turned to face her, his weathered hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "Nathaniel, you don't need to thank me. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You're the bravest, strongest, most remarkable person I've ever known. I'm the one who should be grateful." "Then we'll be grateful together," Nathaniel said, echoing words he had spoken so long ago. "Together," Harrison agreed. "Always together." They kissed there by the creek, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of what had come before. Around them, the evening settled into twilight, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. From the house came the sounds of their family, laughter and conversation, and all the ordinary miracles of daily life. This was their legacy, Nathaniel thought. Not land or money or material wealth, though they had those things too. But this family they had created, this home they had built, this love they had nurtured through 3 decades of joys and sorrows and everything in between. Children who had been given chances they might never have had otherwise. Grandchildren growing up surrounded by love and security. A community strengthened by their presence and their example. As the stars began to emerge overhead, Harrison and Nathaniel made their way back to the house hand in hand, their path lit by lamplight and memory and the deep contentment of a life well lived. Behind them, the creek sang its eternal song. Ahead of them, their family waited, ready to share another evening of togetherness and love, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had chosen each other every day for 30 years, who had built a family and a legacy, and a love that would endure long after they were gone. The gunshot that had brought them together all those years ago had been a beginning, not an ending. From that single moment of choice and chance had sprung everything they had become. And as Harrison opened the door and ushered Nathaniel inside, into the warmth and noise and beautiful chaos of their home, they both knew that they would do it all again without changing a single moment, because this was love. Not perfect, not easy, but real and earned and worth every struggle. And in the end, that was everything they had ever needed. The house enfolded them in its familiar embrace, full of the people they loved and the life they had chosen. And Nathaniel, who had once whispered, "I can't give you children with such pain and shame," now understood the truth that Harrison had known from the beginning. She already gave him everything, and he had given her the same, not just children, though they had those in abundance. Not just a home, though they had built a beautiful one, but something deeper and more lasting. Purpose and partnership, trust and respect, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. That was the real legacy of Harrison and Nathaniel Vance. Not what they had built, but how they had built it. Together, with patience and courage and an unshakable belief in each other's worth. And as night fell over the ranch in Wyoming, over the family gathered around the dinner table, over the land they had worked and loved for 3 decades, that legacy continued. A testament to the power of choice and kindness, of seeing value in broken things and having the courage to help them heal. The story that had begun with a gunshot and a desperate flight had become something beautiful. A love story, yes, but more than that. A story of redemption and second chances, of building family not just from blood but from choice and commitment and daily acts of love. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything,